Welcome to Star Wars Music Minute, where we celebrate the music and sound of Star Wars 5 cinematic minutes at a time. I'm Chrysanthi Tan, you can call me Xanthi, and today we're diving into the soundscapes of minutes 71 through 75 of Star Wars Episode 4, the motion picture A New Hope. This portion of the film starts with Ben Kenobi telling Luke, "The Force will be with you always," and ends with Chewie and the gang getting rid of some pesky officers and getting ready to find Princess Leia. Today, I'm pleased to be joined by Riley Silverman. I shamelessly scouted her from Star Wars Minute podcast because I love her commentary on that show. Hello, Riley.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing great.
Awesome.
I'm ready to talk about A New Hope.
Always a good time.
Yeah, definitely. And this set of minutes is interesting because the first half of it doesn't have any music.
I noticed that. I was like, and I was starting to wonder if there would be any music. Like, what were the odds that I would get the 5 minutes that had no music whatsoever? It's just all soundscape.
Yeah. Well, what do you think of the soundscape?
I think it's really interesting because when I'm admittedly not someone who normally focuses on that. So, which is weird because I love it. Like, I love those the soundscapes they do on Disney Plus where they take out they only show clips with no dialogue and just sound. I think it's amazing. But yeah, I think it's really interesting because there's such uniformity, so you can really tell that it's an Imperial base versus, say, like if you're in a Rebel base. I feel like in a Rebel base you'd have a little bit more chaotic noise to it, or you'd have like because Rebel bases are more strewn together with what they can scrounge up, whereas the Imperial base is like everything's been made to code and it's uniform and it has like requisition numbers and things like that, and so there's a lot of like, I don't want to say a metronome, but there's a lot of like monotonous repeated sounds. Like there's one sound in particular that I noticed, like there's like a kind of thing going on with it. And
the Death Star.
Yeah. So there's like a lot of mechanical sounds that are repeated, and you can tell like, oh, this is like it's a militaristic. It's very to code. It's very to standard. It's very to ordinances and things like that. So other big words that mean hierarchy and things like that, uniformity and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, let's listen to a bit of the beginning.
The Force will be with you always.
So here you can really hear that really subtle in the background.
Yeah, that
like before that.
Yeah. You definitely hear it a lot as the minute goes on, but yeah,
it's like the Death Star telemetry that Ben Burtt recorded his like grandfather's 1930s like shortwave radios, and put that all in the Death Star, which the Death Star like is so multi-layered, and I think what you immediately like honed in on with the difference between how Rebel bases and like Imperial bases or places sound. Like that is a really big, it's something that has always really stuck out to me. And it is consistent in the sequel trilogy and the original trilogy too. Like I noticed the same thing with like First Order bases. Like First Order sounds like a lot like Imperial spaces, where everything is like crisp and clean. And it's so cavernous because it's not like there are 100 people like gathered in a room. It's like all very to code, like you said.
Yeah, and they have the resources to build fully operational space stations. Like they have, whereas like the Rebels are really kind of like finding places that are off the grid where they've had to scrounge together to put a base together, and so people are on top of each other, equipment's kind of up to each other, especially you can really see it in Rise of Skywalker when like you can see like they're literally in a jungle and there's just like wires strewn everywhere, and people are just kind of like, and it has that sense of like we're on the run, so we're just throwing stuff together, and I think you can definitely hear that. And I think even when you go to like Galaxy's Edge, you can really notice difference when you're walking in the like section where the First Order recruitment office is versus when you go over to the Resistance base, and the audio changes and there's like a different vibe to it. And you're like supposed to be like the audio when you're at the Resistance base, it's like you're deep in the jungle. So this one, I mentioned that like that sound you hear in the background, the imagery that kind of came to my head when I first started listening to it and honing in on it was almost like when you're at a hospital and there's like breathing machines that are like pumping information, and so that gave it like there's a sterility to the environment on a starship, or like on a Star Destroyer on the Death Star, that you don't get on a Rebel base.
Yeah, sterility is like exactly. Yeah, I think that's a word that's been on the tip of my tongue for like weeks that with regard to the Death Star space. And it's funny that you mentioned the hospital thing because you've probably heard this story, but I like to tell guests who haven't, which is that the original design for Darth Vader's sound was like breathing and clicks and like beeps and like all these things to like make him sound like really mechanical. But Ben Burtt was like, he ended up sounding like a whole emergency room. So we just cut it back to the breathing.
Yeah, and the breathing alone is so much scarier than I think if you had too many sounds, it would have been too much, or would have like maybe like downplayed the imposingness of it. But just that breathing, that's why whenever you have a scene where the breathing machine is like suddenly coming in, it's so iconic because it's like isolated as this one imposing sound.
Yeah. And I feel that way about like sound in general. I think stripping things away to the most essential element is really underrated as a technique because sometimes I get the sense that in order to escalate intensity, just more things keep getting added. And if you never do a stripping back, then you start to run out of layers. Like it just becomes, you just max out like on all the fronts, like add more sound. And I think a lot of movies, I guess more in the post, like later than Star Wars, sometimes toe that line between being like really brute force, like
Hmm.
being really like over the top with more, and forgetting that like sometimes you can strip back, and then if you strip back, you actually don't have to go to as high of a place to achieve the same like emotional intensity.
Yeah, if you're already at a 10, it's hard to go to 11. But if you're at a 2 or a 3, it's way easier to go to a 7 and feel like you've done a whole lot. And I feel
Exactly.
like that's why like one of my biggest pet peeves in modern soundtracks, especially in trailers, is the like boom kind of like the very like oboe heavy like just boom where it's like there's almost no real like there's it's like completely abstract sound that doesn't really mean anything, but it's like that's their way of being like this is a
It's the
big imposing
blom.
force. Yeah,
Yeah.
like the big womp is just
Hmm.
like so overdone, and I could if I never hear it again, I'd be happy.
Yeah. Yeah. I read a very interesting paper on that that I will link in the show notes, but probably shouldn't talk about here. But it talks about sort of like um, the like aggressive scoring of things, and like the how sometimes they're like coded into like militaristic and like war context, and they keep it getting like propped. Anyway,
Yeah,
I'll link to that. But yeah,
interesting.
definitely, it's one of the reasons that I actually can't stand to watch trailers. It First of all, trailer music is it's like done separately from the film music, and it like gives me an impression that's like usually an unfairly poor impression of what I'm about to watch because I don't want to just see that, hear that.
Yeah,
Uh, but anyway, here is the opposite of that. Like here, it's very stripped back, and so we are just confronting the sound of the Death Star and the cavernous feeling, the sterility, and Vader's breathing when it does come in. And I think it really gives space to the dialogue too, because here the rhythm that I'm paying attention to, at least, isn't the rhythm of the non-existent music. It's the rhythm of like the space between each line is really fascinating here. Like how long the pauses are between everyone. And let's see. Okay. So oh yeah, okay. This starts like at the end of Ben Kenobi's larger speech, not speech, but like his farewell, basically.
yeah.
So he had just finished saying they must be delivered safely or other star systems will suffer the same fate as Alderaan regarding the droids. And your destiny lies along a different path than mine. And here he says the force will be with you always. And at this point, it seems like Luke probably doesn't understand it. I don't think Luke understands that that was going to be his last,
Oh, he
like,
totally doesn't. Yeah,
yeah.
Luke is clueless at this point. Yeah,
And Han is like, you said it, Chewie, where did you dig up that old fossil? And Luke's line here is so interesting to me. It's so naive to me. Ben is a great man. Uh,
So much going on there. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. And Han's like, yeah, great at getting us into trouble. And I feel like Luke is immediately, as soon as Ben is gone, I feel like Luke is more like, not antagonistic, but like he's a little bit more feisty now
Yeah.
that Ben is gone. And he feels more like Luke versus Han is like more of a thing that they're playing off of, more so than before. Because before, I feel like Ben Kenobi was tempering Luke, kind of being like, all right, chill, and kind of being humorous, but not here.
Yeah, you definitely can see, like, even though he's only been Luke's master for like 2 days, you definitely can see the element of like his influence on him. And now that he's gone, Luke is in the situation where he's like, I'm like, I went from being a farm boy who wanted to get away to suddenly now I'm in the heart of the strange and mysterious new space station from the Empire, and now I'm trying to rescue a princess. Like, it's such a vast difference from where he was every moment of his life until now. And I think he's now that even like I think that even Ben is Tatooine to Luke a little bit, right? Because he's known who Ben was his whole life. He's that crazy old hermit, right?
Oh, yeah,
Now
that's weird.
suddenly he has there's literally no touchstone of home at this point where he's at. And so now he's just kind of like flying by the seat. It's like maybe the first time in his life where suddenly it's whatever Luke wants to do is what Luke's going to do, which is really fascinating.
Yeah, and here's it's like adolescence here. It seems like Luke is testing the limits of, I don't know. We're seeing Luke grow, and like we've all been Luke at some point here, and I think yeah, I used to definitely be like, why is Luke is just like, I didn't see Luke the Jedi here as he was in like Return of the Jedi, for example. And I saw Return of the Jedi first, so going back to here as a kid was an interesting like reversal. But Luke is like, well, you're not getting any ideas, and Han's like, well, anything's better than just hanging around waiting for them to pick us up. So Han is a person of action, or at least someone who, and in person of action, whether it's fully thought out or not, he has that kinetic energy to him.
Yeah.
And Luke is like, what is it? 3PO's like, I'm afraid I'm not quite sure, sir. He says, I've found her, and keeps repeating, she's here. And Luke's like, well, who has he found? And of course, we know this. Okay, this bit of dialogue, I'm just going to play this. Because,
yeah, play it. Yeah. I watched it, but it's definitely going to be
around waiting for him to pick us up.
Who do you think? What is it?
I'm afraid I'm not quite sure, sir. He says I found her and keeps repeating she's here.
Well, who? Who has he found?
Princess Leia.
The princess? She's here?
Princess.
Where? Where is she?
Princess, what's going on?
Level 5, detention block AA-23. I'm afraid she's scheduled to be terminated.
Oh, no. We've got to do something.
What are you talking about?
The droids belong to her. She's the one in the message. We got to help her.
Now look, don't get any funny ideas. The old man wants us to wait right here.
He didn't know she was here. We just find a way back into the detention block.
I'm not going anywhere.
They're gonna execute her. Look, a few minutes ago you said you didn't want to just wait here to be captured. Now all you want to do is stay?
Marching into the detention area is not what I had in mind.
But they're gonna kill her.
Better.
So this goes on for a while, and no music this whole time.
Yeah, it really lets you focus, like you said, on what they're saying and what's happening, and you can really hear just in their voices the shift in their attitudes. Like previously, Han was a man of action, and Luke was like kind of like still feeling a little lost, waiting for Ben. But now it's the other way around. Now he's like, oh no, the one thing that I know that I'm supposed to do is here. So now I have a purpose. I have a thing that I want to do, and let's do it.
Yeah, and if they were to put music in somewhere, like, I would guess that it would be after, I'm afraid she's scheduled to be terminated. And I like, like, I don't know. I can imagine in an alternate universe that music would have been here, and it like some ominous sort of music. Because now, we know she's going to be terminated and everything. But I think it's I think that would have like misdirected our attention to Princess Leia's fate. And we, the audience, already know that she's scheduled to be terminated. This isn't really about being terminated. It's really about like the focus is Han and Luke. It's like their decision making, and it's this conversation. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. And I think that it's really interesting to hear this dialogue, having now seen Solo, which obviously was made decades after this was written and done. But you do get an idea of like Han previously was like, Han is such an interesting character when you add Solo into the mix, because he's a character who is like, he's like always like, I'm not the hero, I'm just the smuggler, I'm an outlaw, whatever, but always ultimately does the right thing. And you still kind of get that here. It's really interesting. And he's like, I'm not here to march into a detention center and save the day. And all he really needs is that one little bit of like, well, she's rich. And then he's like, oh, well, this will help me get out of my mess. But it's still a really interesting dichotomy between the Han who gives the fuel to the little band of rebels versus the Han now who's like, I'm out for myself and I take care of myself. And it's a really fun through line in my mind.
Yeah. I get like Han is protecting himself in a way, and I don't know how conscious it is, but I definitely understand what it's like to not want to assert that I want to do something good because I don't want the pressure, but like I still do want to do it, but I just don't want like to assert that I'm going to do it just in case it doesn't work out.
Han has built this identity for himself as a survivor, and the person who just like kind of does what he does to get to the next day. And now he's being given an opportunity to be like, hey, when you were younger, you did something really good, and like now you have a chance to do it again. And he's kind of like, I don't know if I'm ready for that responsibility again, because it didn't work out great for me last time I did it. So what am I going to do now? And I also want to go back to that comment we were talking about with the where ominous music would have come in after the comment. I like that it treats R2's beeps as importantly as it would dialogue that is audible to a listener who understands what's being said. Like, I think that like it's the conversation when R2 is speaking to 3PO and 3PO is translating it to the other people. It's just like what it's saying is like what R2 is saying is important, and R2 is a character, and his dialogue matters, even if nobody in the audience understands what he's saying. And you can really hone in on the fact that each one of his beeps is different, and his beeps are communicating information. It's not just random beeps that somebody added into the soundtrack later, but it was like a conscious decision to make the beeps into a conversation.
I think that's an excellent point. And I was thinking that as well, like the space, the space given to all of R2's dialogue is just, I don't know, it's a way that the soundtrack, I don't want to say like manipulates the audience, but like helps push the audience into respecting R2 as like an autonomous, like, or you know, a really important character. And I think sound, like I've been thinking about this a lot with Book of Boba Fett as it's been coming out too, but like I think sound has such a subconscious effect on how we perceive like action on screen. And the sound is so like subconsciously effective that it's rarely talked about, and things that we feel, that we internalize, like we'll attribute it to other things that we do see and say like, I think it's because of this. And like we'll rationalize it with like things that we do understand when sometimes it's like it's something like giving space for that character, and that could be the difference between one droid coming off as more important than another. And it's not necessarily just because one of them is like cooler or better, or has like, I don't know, better dialogue or better design. It could be that the soundtrack gave them space.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was thinking about that. We were talking about the space and the importance of dialogue. I was just thinking about how in the very beginning of this scene, when we cut away from the other moment, and now we're in this detention, this control room, and there's no music, and there's just the Imperial stuff in the background. One of the first sounds you hear is Chewbacca doing his like Wookiee, like kind of like roar a little bit. And I was thinking about how that's almost really on purpose as well, deliberate, in that it really establishes the not even rebels at this point. They're just a band of weirdos who found their way on the station. But that like really establishes them as like an opposite of what's happening. You have this very clean, sterile, militaristic environment, and now you have this Wookiee that is like animalistic and bestial in nature, and this like roar sound. It like pierces that silence and that monotony to like really establish like these are different. These don't belong. This is not their space.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I always comment on how like you can tell from the sound that the Imperial bases don't have a lot of like shaggy furniture, because that would have like absorbed all those sound waves. There wouldn't be that much reverb. And so literally like the walking carpet does not belong on the Death Star.
Yeah, I do like the idea of there's like one lounge on the Death Star that is like cozy and comfortable. Like it would never happen that way, but I love the idea like, oh, here's the officers' lounge, and it's like going to like a Delta Sky Club or something.
They're all allowed like 1 hour there a week, or they'll just lose themselves in the Death Star. This is a little bit off topic, but like I think so places like Galaxy's Edge or like this new Star Cruiser hotel or whatever, I think it's an interesting choice when people try to create a Star Warsy environment and choose to make that Star Warsy environment a place that is in space, traveling in space. When to me that is like such an unfriendly part of Star Wars, is the parts where you're traveling in space, and so many characters do not like traveling, and like the Empire is always like stationed in space, like on this big thing that they've constructed. And I don't know, like what about like the planets? Like I don't know, Alderaan or like Naboo, or I don't know. I think it would be like Star Wars isn't like space to me. To me, Star Wars is the terrestrial like planets.
I agree with you in spirit, but I also think that I also feel like they miss out with these things. And that's why I love going to Batuu, because I love walking around on a planet, like especially at night when the atmosphere really comes together. Like I feel completely absorbed in the immersion when I'm there.
Same.
The Star Cruiser, I feel like part of why, besides the fact that I'm not loaded and full of money, part of why I don't think that like I'm as excited about the Star Cruiser as I would want to be is that I do want to be in space in Star Wars, but I don't want to be in space on a massive Star Cruiser. I want like if like the thing that I would want to do in Star Wars in space would cost even more than the Star Cruiser does, because I want to be a I want to be a ragtag group of like plucky individuals that are like on a freighter that are on like, I want to be on the Falcon, I want to be on the Ghost, I want to be on a little ship where it's like me and my friends, and like I wouldn't even need to be there all day. I could be there for an hour and be fine. Like I could probably, like my biggest thing with Smuggler's Run, and I love it, and I understand all the mechanics about why it's made the way that it is, and it's all designed to help prevent motion sickness. Like the screen is designed in a way that like you're supposed to keep focused on it. But like I'm one of the weirdos that actually doesn't mind being the engineer, because I love
that's my favorite job on Smuggler's Run.
Yeah,
engineer.
I like to pilot. I like to be the engineer. I don't like to be the gunner, because in my brain I'm going, no, the gunner doesn't sit in the cockpit. The gunner has a whole separate gunner chamber. And so I wish they could redesign that ride so that like people could be in the gunner seat while like if they had like two pods next to each other, and one could be the gunner and you could be like firing at TIE fighters. But obviously that would be a way more complicated system, and it wouldn't be a people eater the way that it is. So I understand it, but yeah, like if I'm going to be in space in Star Wars, I want to be a fighter pilot, or I want to be a smuggler. I want to be doing something that is like, you know, more like that kind of immersion, as opposed to being like, oh, I'm a passenger on a cruise ship. And I understand that like there are plot lines you can get involved in where you do get to have more of that vibe, but it's not what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
I don't want to go on the bridge.
You don't want to live on the Death Star or the
I don't want to go on the bridge of a cruiser and go, oh, look at this video screen. I want to be in the gunner seat firing at TIE fighters. I want to be trying to get through a blockade. I want to be bursting through the Kessel Run and trying to avoid weird eldritch creatures in the middle of a strange nebula. That's what I want to be doing.
Yeah, that's way more fun than living on the Death Star.
Yeah.
Though I think a lot of things would be better than living on the Death Star. That doesn't sound like a very chill time.
Although if Disney wants to offer me a free weekend at
right.
to prove me wrong, you're welcome to give it. Like I would take on that responsibility of seeing if I was right or wrong, if you want to offer it to me.
That is so magnanimous.
Isn't it really? Like, I think it'd be great. So
Uh, so we were talking about Chewbacca being the shag rug on the Death Star, very much sticking out, except the way that they get around that, well, we're getting there, is after Luke convinces Han to join because she's rich, and, Han's like, are you sure? Like, I can imagine quite a bit. Yeah, so they convince Han to get involved, and the plan is to put Chewbacca in binders and drag him around as a prisoner. So that's how they get around a Wookiee being out of place on the Death Star, is that he's a prisoner, obviously. He's not super happy about that, but he trusts Han, and I think like letting Han do that, it does like show that there is a great level of trust between the two of them.
yeah, he's completely against the idea when it's Luke, and all it takes is for Han to be like, no, I think I know what's happening here, to convince him. And I think it's also a good moment, like we were talking about earlier, with Han like wanting to do something, Luke being like, well, Han being a man of action, but then kind of retreating from it a little bit. I think the she's rich moment, and then also once he's been given any sort of legitimacy of like, oh, Luke has a plan, then there is something to do that like helps. Like, I think that's the last nugget that encourages him to get involved in this rescue operation, is like, oh, there is an idea of what to do. It's not just let's charge into the detention center. Like, oh, there's a little bit of subterfuge. And I think that like triggers his like smuggler roguish elements, where he's kind of like, okay, I can understand sneaking in. I don't want to just barge in, but if we're gonna sneak in, well, that sounds great. Like,
Yeah, it's interesting that Luke feels better because, I mean, that Han, it takes like having a plan. Like, it's almost like his head needs to convince him, like his rational side needs to convince him to do this. Even if he kind of does want to, he does want to make sure that he's taking care of himself and taking care of himself first. And so he checks off the box of money and plan and all that, which kind of goes against like how I would paint Han in broad strokes as being like impetuous and just whatever, like barging in. It's actually Luke who's like really driven by his heart here, and just like he has a plan, but also Luke is kind of being guided by the Force, really. He's just going to do this no matter what. Even if he didn't have the plan figured out, he was going to do it. He was going to figure it out.
Yeah, he just needs a nugget of an idea to get everybody else on board.
Yeah. So let's get into this.
Rich.
Rich, powerful. Listen, if you were to rescue her, the reward would be,
What?
well, more wealth than you can imagine.
He's
I
not
don't
great
know,
at
I
Jedi
can
mind tricks
imagine
yet.
Quite a bit.
Yeah.
Get it.
I better.
You will.
All right, kid. You better be right about this.
All right.
What's your plan?
3PO, hand me those binders there, will you?
So now Luke's trying to put them on.
Okay. Now, I'm gonna put these on you.
No, you're not.
You put those on.
Don't worry, Chewie. I think I know what he has in mind.
Master Luke, sir, pardon me for asking, but what should R2 and I do if we're discovered here?
Lock the door.
And hope they don't have blasters.
That isn't very reassuring.
It really isn't. I'm with 3PO.
I love it so much. That's one of those iconic moments that, like, as a kid, I remember so clearly, of like this droid being afraid of the Wookiee and speeding away.
Yeah. So that is in this 5-minute chunk. That's exactly halfway, like around the 2:30 mark, and that's the first bit of music that we're getting, and it coincides with the scene change. Like, now we're in the detention area, and the first thing we see is the mouse droid being scared by Chewbacca, and if you're following along on the soundtrack, this starts like right at the beginning of the track called Mouse Robot / Blasting Off. And if you have a different version of the soundtrack, it's the beginning of the track Wookiee Prisoner / Detention Block Ambush. There are so many versions of the soundtracks.
Yeah.
So one of those, but that's right at the beginning of those tracks.
You can't go wrong with Mouse Robot. Like, that's just kind of like, yeah.
Yeah. And so if we were to hear that without the sound design, it would just be this. Which is so it's so different. Like the score leaves space for the sound design on purpose, because like those little plucks, the little like pizzicato is really just accessory to the droids and the Wookiee.
It really like emphasizes the mischief that's happening here. Like it really makes it capery in this moment, which is very different than most of the rest of the music you hear when you're in an Imperial setting. So I think like it really kind of it sets off this like little vibe of like, oh, we're up to something, you know, mischievous. I said mischief already, but I can't think of a better word. You know, look at us scoundrels off on our little mission. But
yeah, and there is a bit of that like during the subterfuge stuff, which I actually didn't realize. I didn't remember how like long that part was, like how many little tiny barriers. I mean, I don't know. In retrospect, there are lots. There's like we haven't even gotten to the trash compactor, but they do have to go through a lot of hoops on the Death Star, like little annoying ones, like getting some stormtroopers out. And I forgot how much work Chewbacca actually does in this. One thing that the last guest that I had on mentioned about the mouse droids was that he had heard somewhere, and I still haven't found a source for this, but I did pull up some clips to compare, that the mouse droids were Ben Burtt imitating Curly from the Three Stooges.
Huh.
And I do know, like, the mouse droids are Ben Burtt. That is true. That's his voice going and pitching it up. And, you know, Ben Burtt does several of the voices, like the Dejarik pieces. And, you know, there's a lot of Ben Burtt in the sound design. But he was convinced that he heard somewhere that it was like an imitation of Curly from the Three Stooges. And I think that like George Lucas would imitate Curly a lot or something. Are you familiar with the Three Stooges?
A little bit, not super deeply. I mean, I know Larry, Curly, and Moe, and I kind of know like the vague ideas of like poking in the eye, the slapping, and stuff like that. And I haven't like sat and watched any like Stooges films, but
yeah. So I looked up Curly's funniest moments. That's the name of the YouTube video. You know, a compilation to get a sense of what Curly sounded like, and I'll play a little bit.
Silver bells and copper shells and one measly petunia. What? Petunia.
So he's the high pitched.
You mean chrysanthemum? I mean petunia. I heard you the first time. This one's locked too. What do we do now? Well, you break the arm off about there, then you don't like that? Well, then we can blast.
These are very not.
I said no smoking. Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. That's it. That's what? Water always runs downhill. On your way. Where? Up the hill and shut off the water.
So I can kind of hear it.
I guess that kind of makes sense too if you think of it as this moment where it gets in, because I know like Curly is often like intimidated by Moe or whatever, so it's like this feels, maybe I could be wrong about what I'm talking about, but he's kind of pushed down by the deeper voice. So having Chewbacca roar at him and having the mouse droid do this like moment of cowardice and scream and run away is very like accurate to that depiction.
Yeah, and there's a very sing-songy quality to Curly's voice, and I mean, in watching clips to like refresh myself on the Three Stooges, like I think I forgot or like I underestimated how physical the comedy was, and how like exaggerated not only the physical motions but also like the sound of voices were in that era. It was actually it's really fun to compare how things are so much more subtle now. And yeah, I don't know. It just, it was interesting. And we do know that George Lucas does have opinions on the Three Stooges. So I found something from 2004 in which he was criticizing the color edition releases, which is hilarious. So
That's really funny.
from Showbiz Data, George Lucas, a longtime foe of colorized movies, has sharply criticized Columbia TriStar Home Entertainment's decision to release 2 Three Stooges DVDs today that will allow viewers to watch them in either their original black and white or digitally colored versions. In an interview with the Associated Press, Lucas said that the Three Stooges slapstick comedy belongs in a black and white universe. Would color distract from their comedy and make it not as funny anymore? Lucas asked. Maybe just the fact that they're in black and white makes it funny because their humor is dated, but by putting it in black and white, it puts it in a context where you can appreciate it for what it was. But you try to make it in full living color and try to compare it to a Jim Carrey movie, then it's hard for young people to understand. It's not fair to the artist.
I wonder if the only reason why he feels that way about that versus what he did to Star Wars is that in Star Wars, it's his art. So he's like, I'm allowed to edit my own art and change it, as opposed to somebody coming in and re-editing my art, which might be maybe the divine. I think maybe like he's not as aware of like the audience sense of ownership over something, where like maybe like, you know, the changes that he made, like in similar style of like adding color to it takes it out of the context of when it was made. I feel like the same thing happens when you add CGI to certain elements of Star Wars, where suddenly it's like, this doesn't feel like everything else in the film feels, especially when you start adding in just random little creatures or like the, you know, this is way off topic for this film, but Jedi Rocks, I feel like the addition of the CGI dancers and the weirdness like really detracts from everything else that happens in the Jabba's palace scene, let alone the song change. But previously it was so seedy, and also it's such an effective use of puppetry that to suddenly shove in these CGI creatures that don't feel like they fit the rest of the scene, that's my feeling about it. But maybe he feels differently because it's like, I made this movie, this is what I wanted to convey when I made it, but I didn't have technology to do it, so now I fixed it, quote unquote.
Maybe.
But yeah,
I grew up with Jedi Rocks, just for the record, and so like that's what I knew as the original, and so I can't appreciate the fact that it was a change like other people
That's
can.
fair. I get that. Yeah. Like you don't have Lopty Neck burned into you the way that I
Right.
did. Like, 'cause, like I would say that like Lopty Neck, I think, and the entire Jabba's palace scene is one of the scenes that like made me fall in love with Star Wars.
Me too.
And
Me too.
Because
with Snipe, and for me, a lot of it was Jedi Rocks.
That's fair. And like, actually, I love hearing that perspective on it, because I think it's as someone who loves Rise of Skywalker and gets frustrated when people act like there's absolutely nothing to enjoy in it. And I'm like, maybe you just didn't read it the same way I did. And like, my read is not less valid than your read. I think that like, it's good to hear something that I'm called on, where I'm like, oh, I feel like universally everyone hates Jedi Rocks, but it's good to hear somebody go, no, I grew up with it and this was my version of it. So that's great, because I think what made me fall in love with that scene, I'm not as musically inclined, and when I first saw Star Wars, I saw it in order in a VHS box set that included a fourth tape called From Star Wars to Jedi. That was the behind the scenes of it. And when they got into how like they showed the puppetry being put together in Jabba's palace, like as a giant Henson and Muppet fan that I am, that's what made me like go, wow, there's so much happening on screen that you almost miss things in the background as it's going, but they still put all this work into making all these things. And so, and I love the way Cy Snoodles as a puppet is. Like I love, like that one was like one of the, I had that moment in that documentary is like burned in my brain from childhood of like, wow, I can't believe how much work went into making this little like marionette basically. And so then when they took that out and made it a CGI character that doesn't fit in my mind, I'm like sad by it. But it is really cool to hear somebody else who has the exact opposite experience with it.
That's fascinating. I actually feel like I'm going in reverse with my appreciation of Star Wars like re-releases and everything, because I'm just starting to see some of the things that happened before the special editions, and my mind is a little bit blown on some of them. Like one of them is just the opening crawl was a practical effect in the first originally, and like for some reason that singularly like blew my mind to see and to even conceive of, because I think the age that I came into movies and like how I fundamentally understood movies is like I couldn't really tell the difference between puppet and CGI. To me, it was all just like looked like movies.
Yeah.
And it's not until like more recent years that I've been able to start telling the difference. And by like going back and like watching some Muppet stuff and like like I really appreciate puppets in a way that I never used to, because Yoda in the original trilogy, Yoda bouncing around in the prequels, to me, all cool. Like I didn't really see a huge difference.
Yeah.
And I know some people feel that with music, but I feel that with CGI.
And I think it makes sense too, because like you didn't grow up, like I grew up when there wasn't CGI as an option, and when CGI was used, it was horrible looking. Like it was stuff like Last Starfighter, where it just looks like a video game. It doesn't look like a world that people could be inhabiting. And I think if you grew up in an era where your first major exposures to CGI are like the prequels, where it's like fully realized worlds are being built around people, like I think it's a very different experience than having it slowly fed into things that you're doing. So
yeah. But these things all come around, because then at some point for me, this like the CGI-ness was really, really pleasurable, like because I love the prequels because I grew up with them, and I love seeing like all the cities, and I like seeing the fully realized like Coruscant and like the Senate and like all of that stuff. But then I think like like we were talking about when the music kind of gets maxed out at a certain level, like my appreciation of CGI elements got maxed out at a certain level when it was like, oh, everyone can do, like everything is CGI, and there's not really that much limit to what you can do. I stopped appreciating like the levels of like more CGI and even better CGI and even more impressive big looking things. And now when I see like puppetry, I'm like, wow, there's something special to that.
Yeah, I did a deep dive on the creation of the Yoda puppet because I was writing a piece about Wendy Froud, because I was doing it about her as like a forgotten woman. I did a Forgotten Woman of Genre podcast that I wrote for Sci-Fi when I used to work for Sci-Fi, and I had Wendy Froud as one of my people that I had to write for, and I didn't know that she had designed the Yoda puppet, and that the reason why Henson lent her out, essentially, the Henson company, not Jim Henson himself, like lending a person, but the company, because she was supposed to be working on puppetry for Dark Crystal, and then when Frank was going to do the voice of Yoda, he basically needed a puppet to like practice with and like rehearse with, and so she designed this like rehearsal puppet. And it was basically because they were already trying to figure out like how to make the puppets in Dark Crystal look effective enough on screen for a film, and so they were like, oh, here's this movie that will pay us money to build a puppet for a scene. It's a really good way of like testing our technology for our movie. And so that's why she like built the Yoda puppet. And then what happened was like George liked the puppet she made for Frank to rehearse with so much that he ended up letting her make the actual puppet for the movie as well, or design the puppet for the movie as well. So like that kind of like deep dive down the history of things like makes me really excited. It makes me really happy that then they come full circle on it too, where you get to, and I on Star Wars Minute, I have historically misspoken about what used miniatures and what didn't. So I was wrong about scenes in the prequels that used miniatures that I thought were all CGI, like on Mustafar. A listener very rightly called me out for like saying they don't use any miniatures, and then they posted a picture of the miniature set being used. But I love that for Mandalorian, the Grogu puppet is a puppet, and that like they thought about doing it as a puppet or a CGI, and then ultimately went with the puppet, and I think it looks so much more realistic because of that. And even in Last Jedi, it's a Yoda puppet that's being like affected as a ghost as opposed to being a CGI creature. So it's funny that they've come full circle on choosing to use it when they can, as opposed to just not using it at all.
Yeah, that's actually like in a way that relates to sound design, because like I think about Chewbacca and I think about like the puppets that have sounds like associated with them, and sound design in itself is not like a purely realistic art, like it's an art, like soundtracking, and Ben Burtt has said that like sound, there is a language, there's like a type of musical language to sound design that is not just like trying to, I don't know, realistically copy real life. Like there are certain things that you amplify, and there are certain like you hype certain things up like to elicit an emotional reaction. Like sound design is it's actually like hilariously like fake in many ways. Like, like obviously punches don't sound like that. Like things are played up. And so to have something like Ben Burtt's sound design, it's like suited for puppets basically. And like Chewbacca, for example, like his lips don't have articulation in that mask, and so the sound of Chewbacca comes from the throat. Like it's a very like throat produced sound that doesn't have like lots of like mouth sounds in it or like lots of lip sounds in it, and it's believable coming from that mask where the lips don't really touch, because it's really just a like I can't do the sound, but you know the Chewbacca sound.
I can't do it either.
Yeah. So
it's funny because like even as someone like myself who loves puppetry and is really a big fan of when it's used effectively, I've never once in my life thought about the lips articulation on Chewbacca because I like it's weird like I don't think about Chewbacca as a puppet, but even though he's a costume, but yeah, his head is a puppet and there is a whole system there. So it's funny like how bringing in the sound design aspect makes me realize like this aspect of Star Wars that I've never really thought about before.
Yeah, and the sound design, this like I'm a huge Disneyland sound design person. Like I love going to the parks, at least pre-pandemic. I would love going to the parks like by myself just to like I would go on the rides and then try to like guess where all of the speakers are and like how many speakers and like if there's like on board and like how many and like where they're coming from the animatronics, like where they would hide the speaker on like a character's mouth or something, because our ear can discern like, you know, only 6 degrees of separation, like of act, you know, we can, it has to be really like spot on horizontally. Vertically, there's more like wiggle room in terms of where sound can originate. But it's such a, it's one of those like arts that is hard to get right. But like when it's wrong, it's just, it has devastating effects. Like it has the effect of you don't even know which character is talking, or like you misattribute something important to the wrong character and you don't really know why, but the sound has to match what you're singing or it's just uncanny. Like you can't piece it together.
I'm as fascinated as you are, but I'm not a sound person. But going to Disneyland and like trying to myself discern the magic, like discern like what effect they did and stuff like that. Like for me, it's more the visual effects. Like, oh, is that a Pepper's Ghost effect? Or like there's certain rides where I'll look back as we're passing to see if I can catch a glimpse of the effect resetting. You know, it's very rare. Most of them you can't. Like usually something's wrong with the ride if you can. Or I'll notice like called Pirates of the Caribbean, there's the player piano, and for a long time it wasn't there. And I think like it didn't return until after the pandemic, but it's a different piano now too. But the funny thing about it was the sound was still in the mix. So you'd still hear the piano, but you wouldn't see the piano, but you could hear it, like you're saying, I could hear it coming from exactly where the piano is in the ride. And similarly, like there's a couple times in Pirates where like a parrot is missing, but you'll hear the parrot's voice squawking, and it's really funny when that like combination happens because the animatronic is gone, but the audio still has the speaker is probably still right behind it on the bridge, so it's still going off as a speaker because they can't just like isolate that one sound and turn it off because it's important to the overall mix. And similarly with Galaxy's Edge, I've actually gotten into debates with people sometimes because comparatively to the immersive environment for the franchise that should not be named at Universal, like when you walk into that area in Universal, you hear John Williams' score from the movies playing, and it's like you hear the sound effects, but you hear the actual music. And I've had a lot of people complain about the fact that when you go into Galaxy's Edge, there's not music playing. And I'm like, because that's not immersive. If you lived on Batuu, you wouldn't hear a soundtrack score. You would hear ambient noise. You would hear the like things that are like the hustle and bustle. Like the things that are really amazing to me about Galaxy's Edge are things like randomly hearing ships fly above the spaceport, and like that, like you feel like you can tell what direction the ships are at, like you know where they are in relation to you, which is really interesting. I think it's like also when you're out in the woods, like you feel that like isolation when you're out in the deep woods where the rebel base is supposed to be and stuff like that. Like, and there is a little bit of music there, but yeah, I'm always like, no, it should not be soundtrack score. It's supposed to be more immersive. And so it does sound like you're on this planet, and that's what they're going for.
Wow. I hope we can go to Disneyland together someday because what I literally, I've been on a podcast called Disneyland Weekly, talking about this very specific thing, the sound immersion of Galaxy's Edge. I'm like obsessed with that too. And I'm very pro no soundtrack there. Like, yeah. I think it's all about about being immersed in the environment. And also like, even when you do jobs like on the app, on the like data pad or whatever, like when you do things, you yourself are influencing the sound that's around you. Like when you like hack into something or something, like you'll see the little like antenna like move and stuff. Like you are affecting things in the park, and not everyone you don't have to use the data pad if you don't want to, but people who do can have like, I don't know, a sense of control over like the soundscape that everyone has to hear.
That's wild because I had never used the datapad until like this week. I snuck down Friday night after work and I'm still a little bit iffy about going indoors for the most part. So I didn't ride a bunch of rides. I kind of just hung out in Galaxy's Edge. That's what I needed for the night. And it was the first time where I had actually downloaded the Play app and was like scanning. And like, I was like, oh, I'm just going to run around and scan cargo things and do missions. And I was doing the mission where you're like guiding Finn on the Star Destroyer and setting things up and like unlocking things as you go. And I didn't even think to look around me to see if it affected things. So next time I go down there and I'm playing on the app, I'm going. So I only did one mission that was like centered in Batu, which was like you're working with the Resistance and you're supposed to go to this location and like find this item drop before the First Order gets to it. And I didn't even think to look around me to see how things were affected when I did stuff. So next time I go, I'm going to do that. That's amazing.
Yeah, I like to just go to the different jobs and do all the hacking jobs, and then do like all the. Like, because there are certain jobs that are just like more fun to me, and I'll just start doing, I'll hack into everything, and then you can like hear things, and when you're intercepting like transmissions and stuff. But anyway,
that's amazing. Sorry.
Yeah,
that was a big digression, but I'm so excited to go back and play because when I used to go to the franchise not be named park, I used to love using the magic wands to affect the windows, and I was like, I wish that Galaxy's Edge had a thing like that, and apparently it does, and I just didn't know it. So
yeah. It's actually it's way better than the wand thing. It's like it's way better than the wand thing.
Yeah, I do wish there was ways you could like use the Force to do things, but I understand that would probably be really hard to do. Like I wish that one thing I wish they would do is now they have. It actually doesn't look that great now. That's not a preview for it, but the lightsaber training that's on the ship. I wish there's a way you could take your lightsabers to Galaxy's Edge and do something with those there. But I understand like. This is a ship exclusive, but then when you see what it actually is, you're like, all right, well, I'm not excited about it anyway.
Yeah. For those who don't know, we're talking about like Disneyland stuff and this Star Wars like hotel thing experience, very expensive experience that is going on now that just started. So moving on, now we're getting our first bits of music, and this is the beginning of the mouse robot track. And here we have some more we have like comm sounds like 517 to scanner control, 316 report to control, in the very cavernous sound or in the very cavernous space. And in a way, those little, it's like part of the ambience is like there's always someone on the comm like calling for something. There's just always going to be communication there happening. And that is apparently Ben Burtt himself with his two friends. They got a bullhorn and went up to a local church when there was no one around.
Oh, wow.
He says it was a big stone church, so it had a lot of nice echo in it. And we just read lines to the bullhorn, things like prepare X-Wings for liftoff and so on. And then took those lines of dialogue recorded in the very echoey space and then just distributed them where needed in the film.
That kind of stuff is fascinating to me. Like, how do you even, like, I get that's like your job and what you study for as a career, but like, how do you even think to go, oh, I'm going to go to this abandoned church and film all my space cavern scenes? Like, it's just, that is why music and soundscapes for me is like maybe the biggest magic trick in Star Wars, because it's like the thing that I understand the least. And so learning these little moves is fascinating to me, because even as someone who has been obsessed with Star Wars since I was a kid, or in filmmaking in general, these things feel so alien to me personally, and I love hearing more about it.
So I think one thing, first of all, the way that Ben Burtt did things, like the industry has changed so much that something like that would not really happen today. Like you would just record that in a studio and then like, put that effect on it that does that. But in general, like in composing and in coming up with sound design, especially Ben Burtt's way, which is like so like you can see his steps, like you can see like all these random things that he's like cobbling together, and it's like it's really fun. It's like the puppet version of visual effects is kind of what Ben Burtt was doing. And I think when people don't come from like a musical or a sound design background, there's like a tendency to first of all, see it as magic, which I think it's magical for sure too. But I think when you don't, how do I put this? Like when you're not, when that's not, okay, sound, for me, sound is just like a way that I view the world without even trying. It's not like without even trying. So when someone sometimes asks me, like when about my music or whatever, like, how did you come up with that? There's like an assumption that it's like a top-down approach with like that, like sound people are like some genius that like put something together, which sometimes can happen, but a lot of times it's bottom up. It's like when Ben Burtt is speaking, like there's a lot of times where you can just tell that it's not that he didn't work hard, but a lot of this was stuff he already knew, like without even, like he knew to play with certain things, like,
That's fair, yeah.
like the lightsaber reminded him of something that he kind of immediately, like he just understands that language of sound design, of sound, and it's like a native way that he can put stuff together.
I think I maybe missed when I said magic trick. I think that like, I get what you're saying about like it feels like magic. I meant magic trick more in the context of like magicians doing it, where it's not like actually magic. It's a trade that someone has practiced and learned, and so it's like someone who is doing a magic trick is like extremely skilled at like sleight of hand and
making
like,
it seem effortless.
Yeah, I think that's what I meant more of, less than like it feels like someone actually cast a spell. It's more like, wow, I can tell these people have like dedicated themselves to learning how all these things work. Like, I'm sure Ben Burtt like probably had previously had to make a cavern sound and something else, and probably that's like why he knew to go to an acoustical chamber to do that in. Whereas nowadays there's a filter that replicates that sound effect, but back then it was like, we don't have a digital way of doing this. We have to do it analog, and here's how I do it. So,
but Ben Burtt is possibly credited as being like the first sound designer. Because I think prior to that, people were using like more so stock sound effects, and sound designer wasn't necessarily like a discrete position on a film. Like there were sound people, but Ben Burtt like went an extra step to like creating new sounds, like more so than just like a sound editor or like, sound cobbler together. Like he was really doing something special that was not quite exactly Foley, but wasn't, and he really expanded the field, like in a really, like, I don't know, Star Wars is such a beyond like its franchiseness now. If you go back to just like Star Wars as a thing to discuss on its own, like you can't argue with the fact that in multiple departments it changed the game. And so it's just like a useful, it's like a useful piece of media to go back to, like not only for filmmaking, but like for music, changed the game for film scores, changed the game for sound design. Totally. Like, it broke a lot of ground.
I think it's worth pointing that out too, because I feel like there's a lot of, how do I put this, like dismissiveness towards Star Wars nowadays when people talk about it, because
Exactly.
I think that people act like it was just the right blockbuster in the right place at the right time. But it's like, no, it actually revolutionized a lot of filmmaking. Like it was not just, it happened to be this one sci-fi movie did really well and became like a thing. It's like, no, this movie created a type of filmmaking that had not existed before. And I think it doesn't get enough credit for that. I think that, like, I think people kind of want to compare it to just like a lot of like the, especially like 60s era B films. Like it's like, oh, it's a little better version of that. But it's like, no, it was as different to filmmaking as like when Wizard of Oz added color to film. Like it is that level of like a shift in the filmmaking industry. And the fact that it also happened to become this blockbuster and helped, along with like Jaws and stuff like that, help create the idea of the blockbuster as a film is important. But it was not just a movie got lucky. Like I think my friend was talking about it recently because someone was saying like, oh, imagine if Dune had been the hit that Star Wars was, and it's like, but Dune didn't invent a filmmaking the way Star Wars did, and that's why it's different. Like
I think Dune and Star Wars comparisons are so surface level.
I agree. Yeah, It was that was the one they picked, like movie wise. But I'm just like, no, there's something like, yes, Star Wars completely borrowed and stole from lots of other types of storytelling, and that is undeniable. But there is also a lot of things that, like, first of all, so do most movies. But that is all, like, you know, if you look at Alien is like ripped off from, like, the screenwriter of Alien admits how much he stole from lots of other things to put them together in this new format, and like that's a lot. Unfortunately, as someone who writes in the industry, a lot of times you go to writing classes and, like, they'll literally tell you that good film or TV writing is basically stealing a lot of other things, putting them together and making them a new thing. Like, that is what collaborative storytelling is about. And Star Wars built new things, and that is, I'm just repeating myself at this point, so I'm sorry. It's
all good, but I think it's like it definitely is a good reminder, because today, when there's a lot more to compare, like if you compare new things that are coming out, yeah, the playing field is like, it's hard to imagine the role that Star Wars played, but it is so much more than we give it credit for, and I think you're absolutely right on that. And in every department, like, so these, like, sort of what if scenarios of, like, what if the thing is, like, what if, but it wasn't, and this is what happened. So
yeah, I wanted to ask you, have you read any of the High Republic books?
All of them.
So I was going to ask if you appreciated, because you were talking about how you see the world in music and sound, and I wondered how you felt about Avar Kriss being like, that's how she experiences the Force.
So, I did not like it. I like it because the thing is, the what I struggle with that is, like, it made text something that was already so blaringly subtext to me. So I think, so I didn't not like it, but I didn't, like, appreciate it, I think, to the level of some other people appreciating the different manifestations of, like, what Force use and everything, because that's always been headcanon. And I think to see it spelled out in such a way was like, oh, well, that kind of makes it sound like a little bit cheaper than it is in my mind already.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah,
wow.
Because like this, and the way I think that is something that, like, could have been portrayed nicely, like in film or something, without the words being like, Avar feels it in the song and such sees the thing. Like, I think that's something that I think I may have liked without words, to be just, like, expressed in a different way, because hearing it like, and each person is a note and it forms a chord and blah blah blah, I'm feeling like, that's really reductive.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, but, like, that is how I feel everything is, and that's, I've always I kind of identify as, like, I feel like in the world, at least as a neurodivergent person, I feel very much like a Force user who hasn't, like, tamed my abilities. And hearing, like, feeling things in music is what I did as a kid. Like, when I wasn't able to talk as much, I would just, like, music would be, like, firing off in my head and I wouldn't be able to get it out. And so it's just such a familiar experience. It's a familiar experience to me.
That's really interesting, because I think for me, maybe it hit them, like, it's so alien to how I experience things that, like, I definitely think that that's not how I would experience the Force, if, you know, so that's really fascinating.
How would you experience the Force?
Oh, I think for me it would be more visuals. I think that I'm a much more visual and medium kind of person. Or actually, that's not true. I think that I experience the Force in written words. Because now that I said it out loud, I know that, like, I have a hard time when I'm writing, like, describing physical spaces. Like, I have a hard time taking, like, I can picture them very clearly in my head, but I can't put them into words. But, like, when I'm talking about, like, story and character and development, that kind of flows out of me immediately. Like, I can follow story threads wildly. So I think for me, I think the Force would probably appear in the form of story.
Oh, that's really cool. Some would say that it does so for 3PO too. Who does not think that he's good at telling stories, but clearly he is. So anyway, we're moving along here. We get this, like, little instance of the main theme in a new way, which is something that I like uniquely about A New Hope, because the main theme is really treated as really Luke's theme. And so we hear it. It's a little bit later. Okay. Oh, that was a little flash of Kenobi and Vader.
not gonna work.
Why didn't you say so before?
I did say so before.
See, it's so different from like the main title that plays during the crawl.
Yeah.
It's more, it's a softer version on woodwinds, which we're getting a lot of in this film, but there are many different versions of it. It's cool to hear the main theme in like a sweeter way.
Yeah, I think that version of it is what I always think of as the hopeful version. Because even though in this scene, like Han is like downplaying Luke's excitement, I think Luke's excitement is really still the palpable thing in this moment. And so, yeah, whenever I hear that version, the woodwind version of the theme, I definitely hear that in a hopeful sense. Like I always hear that as like being like, this is the new hope. This is the spark in Star Wars.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah, I was going to say like the main theme is like a representation of the spark that is still inside of Luke. Like he's still, yeah, that's a good read of it. So then the music clears out pretty quickly after that because we're on the Death Star. So there's really not that much music on here because we have to hear how scary the Death Star is. So the music clears out and the officer's like, where are you taking this thing? And they're talking about Chewbacca. And Luke says, prisoner transfer from cell block 1138. So we get our famous THX Star Wars number.
Easter eggs.
Yes. And the officer's like, I wasn't notified. I'll have to clear it. And stuff happens. Action stuff happens. It's a whole thing. There's
Han's gonna Han.
Yeah, Han's gonna Han. There's gonna be some shooting happening, and Chewie knocks the officer out. Again, Chewie's putting in a lot of muscle here. He's already knocked out a few people, I feel.
Yeah.
And we get this line.
From cell block 1138?
Okay.
I wasn't notified. I'll have to clear it.
Look out, he's loose! Tear all apart! I'll get him!
So, okay. One thing that I notice is the ascending, like heroic low string, like pizzicato here. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I didn't quite know. I didn't pick it up.
It's right after Chewie, like, knocks the officer out. So.
Okay.
Look out, he's loose! Tear all apart! I'll get him!
Yeah.
Okay, and now that I'm like listening for it, if I can hear it, because earlier I think I was so focused on Chewie and the blaster, but now I can hear it. Yeah.
So it's like one of those things that like that line is not the melody. Obviously, it's like a supporting bass line almost that is adding motion to the music in an upward fashion. I'm not describing this very well, but it's like, you see, you didn't even notice it, which is great because I don't think it's something. There's no like melody really there. It's something that is felt, and what it reminds me of, the feeling of it. It reminds me of Return of the Jedi on the sail barge when Luke kind of when it's go time. So I'm gonna actually play that. Well, let's skip to the part. Okay. Oh, wait, I went too far. Okay. So this is when Luke is on the diving board. And now. Okay. R2's ready. Suspense.
Yeah.
Oh my god. Oh my gosh. Wow. There's a lot of suspense building up. So it's a similar thing. It's like do 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 do.
Yeah, and it's a good example too of how that same piece of music sounds so different depending on the instruments you're playing it. Like it's not the softer. It's like we're getting into it. It's like right now. It's just, I think what's funny too is before you get to that, I know we're not doing Return of the Jedi right now, but the blares like before that, like they're spaced out. It's almost like wait for it, wait for it. Like it's like, and then as you said, the suspense, like it's just like building up to it. So
Yeah.
I like there's like a Luke activation sound almost with the...
I mean, I do hear a similar thing in Back to A New Hope. Here, this is the spot. So it's not quite loading the gun to the same extent, but this is the... Here we are. This is the wait for it part in A New Hope.
I think it makes sense for it to be a little more muddied in New Hope versus Return of the Jedi 2, because Luke is a more confident, more like, he's essentially a Jedi at this point in Return of the Jedi. So it's a much more, like, talking about earlier how it's okay to scale back and you don't need to put too much sound in this moment. I think to have, it can be quiet in between it's almost like, to use another John Williams score as an example, it's like using in Jaws, like the bump of the shark coming. The shark is very confident. The shark is a predator. It's ready to go. It's not unsure of itself. And in Return of the Jedi, Luke knows his plan is going to work, and he's very calm and confident. And he's just like, it's why he keeps saying to Jabba, like, I'm keep giving you a chance. This is your last opportunity. Like even though Luke is like, seems like he's in the absolute worst position, he's still talking like, I have all the power here and you are failing. And I think that whereas in A New Hope, he's still learning his powers and he's very new to it. And so it's less confident as things are building up. It's kind of like, well, let's see if we get through this. Whereas in Jedi, it's like, just wait for it. I got this covered.
Yeah.
All part of Luke's plan, to quote Star Wars Minute.
Right. That's totally right. Like those are two, yeah, in a way, the orchestration and like the scoring of it is similar, because you have like some horns on, like you have some brass on top, and you have something going from a low note to a high note in a doot 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 doot. But it does sound muddier in A New Hope, and also like the ascending line that is, kind of a heroic, activating like line. It's the mode of it is like, I wouldn't say it's like exactly minor. I'll have to go back and check. It's like Aeolian or something. But in Return of the Jedi, when it goes up, it's like a clear, like major do 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 do. Like it's much more sure of itself than in A New Hope. Even though the structure of like how this is happening, it's like the same. It's like it's just a little bit of a messier go in A New Hope. It still works out, but it's like definitely a messier go of it.
Yeah,
but the spirit is there. And it's probably like just a Williams-esque way that he writes things, and I'm sure we can find that many times throughout all of his films. But that is his instinct that he had writing it here and versus there. And I think, it's interesting to trace that through line. It's definitely effective for me, at least.
Yeah, it's fun to find the tropes, and even as someone who's like complete like layman when it comes to music, it's fun to hear the tropes in Williams's music over the decades. The same way it is to see the same filmmaking. It's like the musical version of the Wilhelm scream, or I have a bad feeling about this, and like it's like, yeah, we're gonna repeat these same like jokes essentially, or these same like stingers, and it's like he's found a way to work that into his own music, which is really fascinating.
Sometimes consciously and sometimes subconsciously, like any filmmaker probably doesn't consciously do all of their tropes, but
it's like if you watch those YouTube clips of Aaron Sorkin dialogue across multiple Sorkin, and some of the same jokes get repeated, and some of this, it's wild how many times the exact same like exact sentence is said across different shows.
It's so
wild.
Funny. And when you have a long career like John Williams, you're going to end up repeating a lot of natural phrases that come to you, like a lot of instincts that you have to write. And it's funny when people will wonder if something is like a matching theme to something else, when arguably it might just be that's a natural byproduct of how he writes. It's like hidden Mickeys, finding hidden Mickeys in musical scores. If you are looking for like a specific collection of notes, you might end up finding that in a lot of scores.
Yeah.
Where it's not meant to be like a clue. It's just someone's style.
Yeah. And it's like, there's a musical aesthetic that he's given to Star Wars. And if he's going to keep working in that aesthetic, you're going to see a lot of repeating things. The same thing as like if you go on a Star Destroyer, you're going to see some strips of light that are going to be there.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of, it's like, no one's like, I mean, I guess consciously you are saying I have to put up strips of light because you're building the set, but it's not like someone's like, this is a reference to the other movie. It's like, no, that's just what a Star Destroyer looks like. And that
Yeah.
Williams like, this is what a rebellion song sounds like. This is what a,
Like
you know,
a
rescue
fanfare,
sounds
you're gonna have brass, you're gonna have triplets. Yeah, totally. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good point. So we're nearing the end of the minutes now, and basically what happens toward the end here is they're kind of tearing them apart. I don't really know the outcome, if they live or not. Probably not.
Yeah, I think they all die. It's a tragedy.
Tragedy.
Nothing ever happened. There's no sequels to this film or anything.
No. And we kind of end on a cliffhanger. We don't know if they're gonna get to the princess, but it seems like the odds are in their favor. So
don't tell me the odds.
Never.
Never tell me the odds.
So unless you have anything else to say about these minutes or the music in A New Hope, we can move on to the questionnaire.
Yeah, one last thought was kind of going back to what we were saying earlier about the difference between the sound of a rebel base versus a Imperial situation. And we talk about the fact that the names that you're hearing over the loudspeakers are just numbers and codes. And that's like everyone on an Imperial ship, unless you're like Darth Vader or a Moth, you don't really have a name. You have a number and your designation. Whereas if you listen to, like, you can pick out Hera Syndulla's name in Rogue One when they're on, the Yavin base, like, because like people in the rebellion are just going to call out the names of the people they're calling for. And I think that's like a interesting distinction between the two locations. And I'd be interested in listening to the rebel base in this film now. I think when I rewatch it, I'm going to listen for what the overhead announcements are while they're preparing for the attack on the Death Star and see if it's like mostly names, if it's more jumbled, or if it's as uniform as this is.
I think there it's a lot of like Red 5, Red.
That makes
numbers.
sense. It is a call signs, yeah.
But in the deaths, on the Death Star and in Imperial situations, I feel like there is something to their numberness, like, the TK number and everything. Like they are more so numbers, and not just when they're I don't know what it's called, when you're flying, when you need to be in attack formation. I don't know.
Your call sign, yeah.
Yeah, the call sign. Like when they're outside of battle, they go back to their names in the Rebels.
Like I'm thinking more when they're actually in the Yavin base and they're like loading up to go to attack versus when they're actually in their formation. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. When that's happening, they're like being all chummy with each other. They're like,
yeah,
good luck out there.
Yeah. So I want to listen to it and kind of ignore the dialogue and try to listen to like what the speakers are doing and what the sound is like versus what it's like when, like, I've never really thought myself, because this show's making me think about what the sound is like in a Rebel base versus a Imperial base, which is really interesting. Because I know, like, even at like Galaxy's Edge, when you're in the Rebel base before you go on Rise of the Resistance, like you can definitely hear communications that are happening, and they're usually like someone like, it's almost like, can someone check out this thing? We don't know what's happening. It's like just a lot of.
It might be someone using the app.
Yeah, probably is. Yeah.
Yeah. But I do like in the Rebel encampment how you can hear like more wildlife as well.
Yeah, it's supposed to be like on the actual like idea of like in the Art of Galaxy's Edge book, they talk about how on the actual planet of Batuu, the Rebel base isn't nearly as close to Black Spire Outpost as it is in the park, because they obviously don't have enough infinite space in the park to build it. It's supposed to be way out in the jungle, but
I think
like,
it actually feels that way.
Yeah, they designed it in a way to feel like you're supposed to be seeking it out. You're supposed to be going on a bit of a journey to get to it, because they obviously didn't have the space they needed to convey the fact that it is a bit of an effort to find it. So they had to like find ways in designing the pathway to make it feel like you are sneaking kind of far away, and like the journey is taking longer than it actually looks like. It's not just around a corner the way it is when you're actually in the park.
I love it. Well, let's move on to the Star Wars Music Minute Questionnaire then.
Yeah.
Awesome. Question number 1. In exactly 3 words, what does Star Wars sound like?
I think epic space magic is what popped in my head when I read this question. I mean, just I'd probably like the easiest way to answer that question, but
sounds accurate to me.
Yeah, I think Star Wars is, it's ultimately a fantasy setting with a space filter on it, and so I think that the music of Star Wars conveys the magic, the fantasy, as much as it does the like science fiction-y aspect of it.
Yeah, I love that you said that because I feel like it doesn't feel like
It's not hard sci-fi. Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely agree. So number 2, what's something related to Star Wars music or sound that you want to learn more about?
A lot of it I learned today, like talking about the process of making the sound and stuff like that. I think I'm very fascinated by how someone knows how to look at a scene and be like we talk about that, like the rising music in that moment of like, how do you know this is the exact moment to have this sound happen? Like, I guess I'm as fascinated by how someone looks at a scene that has no sound design, no music, and knows where to put stuff. The same way that I think somebody else might be looking at a blank page and knowing like, how do you write a whole scene or how do you convey it with words? So that's where or even just like, I guess maybe like the more one that we already talked about in depth, like we did in this episode. I'm always fascinated by how someone goes about designing a theme for a character. Like, I think Rey's theme is one of my favorite pieces of music in Star Wars now, and I listen to it a lot. And I just like, I wonder, like, how does someone sit down and be like, okay, I'm going to create a piece of music that conveys this character? Because it's like, it's wild to me how effective that piece of music is, and like really, it works so well, and it really does fit her so well, and it just it's like a costume piece for her at that point. So
yeah, I will withhold going on a whole tangent about Rey's theme, but we did talk about that a lot on the Last Jedi season, and okay. I should probably maybe I'll have to do a video on that at some point, because it's very different from any of the other female character themes that we've had before it. And there are interesting reads that one could make of that. Yeah. So anyway, very interesting stuff. Number 3, what is a score or soundtrack that you're fond of besides anything Star Wars?
My other sci-fi obsession, Doctor Who. I'm a really big fan of the scores and soundtracks for that, especially the Doctor Who theme, especially because, kind of similar to how we talked about the way different instruments will change the effect of the music. I love the way that they have done so many different versions of the themes. I think by virtue of being a show that's been on for almost 60 years and had so many seasons, and it's gone through so many showrunners and people in charge of the show and producers, that hearing it in the 1963 version versus the currently the 2022 version or 2021 version, I think is last episode aired in 2022, so the current year. Hearing how it goes from the 1963 version, like if you listen to the 63 version versus the 80s version where it's like all on synthesizers, and it just feels like so much more of like that era of sci-fi. It's like a conversation between the creators of the show over history in my mind. So
that's really cool. I don't know anything about Doctor Who, but it's the same song, but just like it re-recorded in different eras.
Yeah, it's like different arrangements of the same original theme. And so it's really, if you go on YouTube and like look up, like you can see like how it's changed over time. And they also do, different doctors, like different actors playing the Doctor will have different themes for their Doctor. Like, I think my favorite of them is, well, there's 2. There's Matt Smith's I Am the Doctor, which is very like triumphant. I'm rushing into, and like, it's like, the music is like ba-bum, bum, bum, ba-bum, bum, bum, ba-bum. It's very much like charging into battle kind of music. Whereas Peter Capaldi, the Doctor who played him afterwards, a lot of the theme in his era was him deciding if he was a good person or not, or if like what he's doing is actually heroic, or if he's actually causing things to be worse or not. That's kind of like the overall framework of his era. And his theme is Am I a Good Man? And his theme actually does, like, it's quieter at times, and it does have its epic moments, but it also has moments where it's like, oh, he's doubting himself a little bit. And that's like, it's very fascinating how that works out. So yeah, Doctor Who, I think Murray Gold was the composer on Doctor Who from the beginning of the reboot era, 2005, up until the end of series 10, which was Capaldi's last year. He left the show, and then the new composer is Seguin Akinoda, I think is how it's pronounced.
Okay.
But it's a very, and then the sound is very different now versus what it was then. And So not unlike Star Wars, it's same thing with Star Wars now, where it's really fun hearing how non-John Williams people are approaching it. And, like, there was a really funny thing for me with, how Spotify does the like year in review.
Yeah.
There was a while there where I was writing a book that was similar enough to Rogue One in tone for me that I was listening to the Rogue One score a lot while writing, because I can't write to music that has lyrics. I have to write to music that's like scores, because words will distract me from what I'm writing.
Yeah.
Whereas like with a score, I can kind of get lost in it, and then I can get into the themes and the moods of what I'm writing. And I got to the end of 2020, and it told me that I was I was in the top 1% of Michael. I always say his last name wrong. Michael Giacchino's. I always want to add too many vowels. Michael Giacchino was like, you love Michael Giacchino, and it's because I listening to the Rogue One score over and over and over again on repeat while working on my writing. And actually, this year it was John Williams. So the same thing. It's like, you love John Williams, and I'm like, yeah,
No
I kind
kidding.
of do, but yeah. It's so funny when other people are sharing, and it's like whatever pop artist. And I listen to lots of like other music, but I listen to the scores so much that Spotify just thinks that I'm like this massive fan of the Star Wars composers. Which I am, but
Spotify thinks you're a massive Star Wars fan.
it's so
could
weird.
they?
What a
How
weird
could
thing to think about someone.
Yeah.
Am I a
Are those
nerd?
are the books that you were writing while listening to those soundtracks, are they out?
No, I'm still the one that I was writing for the Rogue One thing. I never finished it, and I need to get back to it. So I'm actually kind of now trying to write it more as a script, because I think it might make a good graphic novel or like a 1-hour pilot. So I'm kind of converting it a little bit.
Cool. What's some stuff that people can find of yours?
If you felt I'm on the verge. I can't talk about what I have right now. There's something really big on the horizon that if you follow me on Twitter at Riley J Silverman and at Riley Silverman on Instagram, I promise you the second that I can talk about it, I will shout it from the rooftops. But for now, I have to be a little bit quiet about it. Otherwise, for Star Wars wise, I've been on Star Wars Minute a few times. You can check that out. I've written about Star Wars for Nerdist and Sci-Fi. Most of my sci-fi pieces are in our archive, but so on Nerdist, it's still there. So you can check that out. And I do a lot of actual play role-playing games, so you check those out. I've done a few of those. I did a show for D&D called The Broken Pact. I did a show based on the comic book Rat Queens that was for Hyper RPG, so that's all available on YouTube. So if you're into those kind of things, check those out. And I promise you there was something really big that I will talk about as soon as I'm allowed to.
Oh my gosh.
I'm currently not allowed to.
All right. Fair enough. I can't wait for when that happens. So yes, follow Riley. All of her links will be in the description or the show notes. And on a final note, the musical themes in this set of minutes were the Imperial March Precursor, do, 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 and the main theme, which we played, which was On the Woodwinds. And if you're following along on the soundtrack, we're on Wookiee Prisoner / Detention Block Ambush, or if you have a different version of the soundtrack, Mouse Robot / Blasting Off. So many versions. And that's all we have for this week. You can follow Star Wars Music Minute on all of the places. If you're listening to this on podcast version, it's also on YouTube. And if you are listening on YouTube and prefer it in your podcast feed, it's all on the podcast places. So you can do that. Thanks so much for listening. And next week we're doing minutes 76 through 80 of Star Wars. And may the Force be with you.
And also with you.